Yesterday evening, I began conversing with someone who is older than me that has a master's degree in history. Being a voracious reader when it comes to history books, I was exhilarated at the prospect that I finally met someone who was like minded. As we began to exchange pleasantries and then got into a discussion pertaining to history, what I'm about to say, I'm not saying this to be flippant. I'm not saying this to be facetious. I'm not saying this to come off as arrogant, even though it might. Just an observation that I had. I was perplexed with their lack of knowledge on particular subjects. I presumed someone that had a master's degree in the subject of history would know a lot more about the subject than this person did. And I gave them ample time to discuss this, and they openly admitted some of their lack of knowledge about some of the information I was conveying. For example, we were talking about certain figures that we've read about in history. I stated that Napoleon Bonaparte really wasn't short. It was propaganda by the British to paint him as a caricature. He also could be very loyal to his compatriots. When he was put into jail by the Directory, the French government before Napoleon took over, one of the guards treated him exceedingly well. And because of that, he ended up letting that individual basically be his bodyguard for the rest of his life. Napoleon also had a sense of humor, and he could be very loyal to those loyal to him. Created the Napoleonic Code, which is the basis of all code in Europe today. He started the Rhine Confederation, which ended up creating the modern states of Prussia and Germany. And this individual had no idea, but yet they have told me that they have read a lot about Napoleon. So I then naturally asked, where do they mainly consume their historical information from? And they duly noted, before they proceeded to answer my question, that they've not looked into history for at least 2 years, which is fair. Again, it was very perplexing that someone who enjoys the subject would not take the time for that many months to study the subject, but I continued to let this individual speak. And then they told me that they only read books that they were assigned at college. And then my neurons and synapses clicked together, and that's when I was illuminated. I realized this individual has severely restricted their availability to knowledge, because they only read material that the curriculum allows them to read. Now, I did tell them that I can understand their hesitancy to watch documentaries, especially on YouTube, because regular individuals who have no particular background in the subject, no credentials, they could be wrong. However, reading books about soldiers who were involved in the conflict, looking at certain things that were left out, such as letters, the information I'm telling you about Napoleon, the sources in the book, because I don't just read books, I also look at the footnotes. They were personal letters that were not published for years in the English language. And apparently none of that was in the literature that she read. But I digress. There's a current book that I'm reading that I think is very interesting. I'm about halfway done with it. The book is called With MacArthur in Japan. It's about the Japanese occupation after the atomic bomb was dropped. Douglas MacArthur, and this guy right here, Ambassador William Sebald, I'll show you him on the back, with General MacArthur, he actually wrote this book. Now, simple question here. Let me try to get a clearer pixelation of this. Simple question here to you, the audience. Who would you rather read about the occupation from? Someone who studied it or someone who was actually in it? He actually worked under MacArthur's tutelage, personally met with him, and he was even there for the Tokyo trials. But according to her, this book wasn't valid because it wasn't something college told her to read. Now, I'm not saying every book you read should take as gospel, but if you're going to severely restrict your knowledge base and you're not going to leverage all the resources at your disposal, it's going to stunt your growth and it's going to stunt your knowledge base. And that's an issue I have with some people who go to college. I'm not going to say college is good or bad. It is dependent upon you as an individual. Do the pros outweigh the cons? Does the cost outweigh the benefits? I just didn't think spending over $100,000 for 4 years, starting my life off in debt, having to pay that off in 10 to 20 years just to get a career that would start off at $60,000 was a good investment of my time. In fact, the career that I work in now that I didn't have to go to college for actually compensates me more than that would. And I didn't have to pay all that money. Instead, I invested a good amount of it in the stock market. So instead of having to pay that money back and make less money, I was able to get a slight head start. And then with that money that I'm compensated for, I am then able to travel to these places. I'm actually planning to go to Japan in a couple years. It has also given me the money where I can purchase books that are not at my local library. But the point is, we both have studied the topic. But I would assume someone who spent all that money would know more than I did on the subject. And again, I'm not saying this to be arrogant. I'm not saying this to be tongue-in-cheek. I was genuinely befuddled, bewildered that I knew more about some historical facts than them. But that's the difference between someone who just thinks within a system versus someone who has an insatiable thirst for knowledge. I'm not saying I'm any better than this person. I'm not saying I'm any smarter than this person. I'm just simply pointing out that if all you do is utilize a few resources at your disposal, it's going to severely restrict your growth. There are a lot of problems with the world today, economically, politically, so on and so forth. We get all that. But in no time in history has there ever been a cornucopia of information that you can access. Whether that's on your phone, YouTube, library. You can even go to thriftbooks.com or Amazon and get a book for $20 that's going to teach you a lot more about a subject than you'll learn in most traditional classes. I made a video talking about utilizing all the resources at your disposal, and it's apropos I made that video. That's the difference, though, between someone who utilizes all the resources and someone doesn't. You can spend, think about this, thousands of dollars. And there's nothing wrong with that if you get a job, if you become a teacher, a tour guide, a museum guide, or you can go about it in your own way and educate yourself. But my whole thing is if I'm going to spend all that money and time, I should at least know a lot more than someone who didn't invest all that money. Now, time, that's completely different. I've definitely invested a lot of time.